My name is Bill Rowlands. Most folks just call me Bill, or the caveman if they are feeling playful. I work as a ranger at Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. It is the largest known cave system in the world, and trust me, it feels even bigger when you're alone inside it. People often think being a ranger is a peaceful job. You walk trails, help lost tourists, report animal sightings, maybe rescue the occasional hiker who wandered off the path. But Mammoth Cave is different. It is not just the size, it is the feeling. The weight of the rock above you, the way sound travels or doesn't, the way you sometimes feel like you're not alone, even when you know you are. I have not always been comfortable underground. In fact, I used to be terrified of it. My father and grandfather were coal miners. I followed in their footsteps. One day, a tunnel collapsed. 5 of us went in, 2 of us came out. My brother was not one of them. That kind of thing changes you. It gave me a fear of tight spaces. Claustrophobia, the doctors called it, but over the years, something worse replaced that fear. Guilt. Guilt for surviving when others didn't. Maybe that is why I took the job here. Maybe I thought I could make peace with it all. About 3 months ago, something started to change in the cave. We began getting reports of minor seismic activity. The ground would tremble slightly, barely enough to feel. But with each tremor, something new opened, tunnels we had never seen before. Places that were not on any map. One morning, my supervisor handed me a flashlight and a map with a section circled in red ink. New tunnel opened up near Hollow Run. He said, "Look stable. Take a team in, survey it. Hollow Run is deep to deep. A place we usually avoid unless we have to. Something about it just feels wrong. Cold, even when the rest of the cave is warm still. Orders are orders. Our team consisted of 3 people. Me, Palmer, a rookie fresh out of college, and Davis, a quiet man who had been working here longer than I had. We entered around 8 a.m., fully geared and ready to chart the tunnel. The entrance looked like it had just been born. The stone was wet, fresh, cracked like something had pushed its way out. We stepped inside and the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. It was like walking into the inside of a tomb. We marked our path carefully, leaving glow sticks every 100 feet. The deeper we went, the less sound we heard. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like they were being absorbed by the walls. I kept waiting to hear dripping water, the scurry of cave crickets, the flap of a bat. But there was nothing, absolute silence. Then came the tapping. At first I thought it was just something falling. Maybe a rock dislodged above us, but it happened again, 3 sharp taps. Then silence, then again, always in threes, tap, tap, tap. Palmer stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. We all froze. I held up my hand, motioning for silence. The tapping came again. Closer, tap, 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 dot, dot. We shone our lights in every direction, but there was nothing. Just smooth rock and shadow. We moved forward slowly, the tapping now behind us. Or above us, I could not tell. The sound was wrong. It did not echo like it should have. It felt like it was inside my skull. Then the shadows started to move. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but these shadows did not follow our movements. They slid along the walls and ceiling, sometimes against the direction of our flashlights. I looked at Palmer. His face had gone pale. "It is just your eyes adjusting," Davis said, though his voice lacked conviction. Another hour passed and we entered a new chamber. It was massive, with jagged stone formations rising like teeth from the floor. But that was not what stopped us in our tracks. The walls. They were covered in formations that looked like faces, twisted, deformed. Screaming faces, eyes frozen wide, mouths open mid-screen. It looked like something had molded the stone to resemble agony. Palmer began to shake. "I don't think this place was made by nature," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Suddenly, our lights flickered, all of them. For a brief moment, we stood in absolute darkness. And in that darkness, I heard a breath, not mine, not theirs. Something else. When the lights came back, we were not alone. Something moved behind one of the formations. A shape too tall, too thin. It vanished when I turned my light toward it. Then came the voice, a whisper that did not come from any direction. It filled the chamber. "You should not have come," Palmer screamed. He dropped his flashlight and ran back the way we came. Davis went after him, yelling his name. I tried to move, but my feet would not obey me. My legs felt like they were encased in concrete. The whisper came again. It watches, it remembers, it feeds. I finally forced my legs to move and sprinted after them. I could hear Palmer shouting behind us. Then his screams turned to choking sounds, then silence. When I turned the corner, I found Davis standing alone, panting, blood on his hands. "It took him," he said. "It took him into the wall." I grabbed his arm and we ran. We did not look back. Somehow, we made it to the entrance. Sunlight never looked so beautiful. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. Davis just stood there, staring back into the tunnel. "We have to seal it," he said. "We cannot let that thing out." I reported the incident as a collapse, said Palmer got lost. The official cause was rock instability. No one questioned it, but I knew better. That night I dreamed of the chamber, the faces, the whisper. When I woke, there was dirt under my fingernails and a small stone on my chest. The stone was warm, like it had been alive. Since then, things have gotten worse. Animals near the park are acting strange, birds flying in circles, deer refusing to enter certain parts of the forest. And I keep finding strange symbols carved into the trees, circles with wings, eyes with no pupils, always near places where hikers have gone missing. Last night, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It did not move, did not speak, just stared. When I blinked, it was gone. I know what it was. It got out. I did not sleep the night after I saw the figure in the woods. Every sound outside my cabin set my nerves on fire. The wind in the trees, the creak of the porch boards, the distant howl of a coyote. It all felt wrong. Too loud, too close, like the forest was pushing itself against my walls, trying to get in. When the sun finally rose, I found claw marks on my front door. 3 vertical slashes, deep and wide, not from any animal I know. They looked almost surgical, deliberate, as if whoever left them wanted me to know it had been there. I did not report it. What would I say? That something from a forbidden tunnel left a calling card, that I am being hunted by a creature made of stone and shadow. Instead, I went to the park office and requested all the missing persons reports from the last 10 years. I read every file, every hiker who vanished near Hollow Run. There were more than I expected. Some never made it out of the woods. Some disappeared near the cave entrances. A few vanished without a trace on bright sunny afternoons. When I plotted the last known locations on a map, my blood ran cold. They formed a circle, an almost perfect one. And right in the center of that circle was the entrance to the chamber. The one with the screaming faces. It was not a coincidence. Something was living beneath that place, something old, something patient. A week later, another report came in. A family camping near Blackwater Ridge had gone missing. A couple and their daughter. The rangers found their campsite untouched. Food still in the cooler, tent still pitched, firewood stacked. But the people were gone. No struggle, no blood. Just silence that night. I sat on my porch with a flashlight in one hand and a pistol in the other. Duke, my old shepherd, lay beside me, ears twitching, eyes locked on the tree line. Around 2 in the morning, he began to growl, low, constant. His muscles were rigid, like a coiled spring. I raised the flashlight and scanned the woods. Something stood just beyond the reach of the light. It was tall, thin. I could see the glint of its eyes, too high for any normal man. And then it moved not toward us, but sideways, slipping between trees without breaking a single branch. It did not walk, it glided. I stood frozen until Duke barked, snapping me back. But by then, it was gone. The next morning, Maria returned. She was an old woman who lived in the nearby village. Most people called her eccentric. Said she believed in spirits and signs, but after what I had seen, I was ready to listen. She brought a bundle of herbs and small carved tokens, all bound in leather. She said they were protection, not weapons, just distractions. She warned me the thing I had seen was not a creature in the usual sense. It was older than memory, born from shadow. It did not eat like a wolf or bear. It fed on fear, on memory, on the soul. She called it the Hollow One. She said it sleeps beneath the world, waking only during certain times. Times of alignment, when stars cross paths, or when the veil thins between worlds. It walks when the moon speaks to the stone, she said. And you have disturbed its dreaming. I asked if it could be killed. She shook her head. No, but you might confuse it, trick it, delay it. That was not comforting. Still, I took the tokens. She placed one around Duke's neck, tied with red thread. Your dog sees what you cannot, she said. Trust him. That night, I placed the tokens around my cabin. Burned the herbs in a rusted tin can outside. The smoke was thick, bitter, made my eyes water, but I felt something shift, as if the air around the cabin resisted whatever waited outside. I dreamed again. This time I was in the chamber, but it was different. The faces were moving, whispering. They were not carved, they were real. Trapped in the stone, still alive, their eyes followed me as I walked. Their mouths begged. I saw Palmer. He was part of the wall now. He mouthed the words, "Run." I woke drenched in sweat. Duke was growling again. And from the window, I saw footprints in the dirt, bare, long, inhuman. They circled the cabin, then vanished into the trees. I knew then that the thing was not just watching. It was toying with me. The next day, Davis showed up at the station. I had not seen him since we escaped the chamber. He looked thinner, pale. His eyes were sunken. He sat across from me and whispered. It followed me too. He had moved to another town, far from the park. But things still happened, things that should not. A voice in the radio at night. Claw marks on the door, dreams of screaming stone. He believed, like me, that the Hollow One had marked us. Not to kill us, not yet, but to use us like keys, like anchors. It needed us to remember it, to fear it, to speak of it. That is how it grows, that is how it returns. We decided to go back to the entrance to see if it had reopened. Maybe we could collapse it. Burn it, seal it forever, Maria warned us. She said the veil was thin now. The creature was half here, half there. If we entered, we might not come back. We went anyway. Duke came with us. The trail was quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even the trees felt still. When we reached the entrance, we saw that it had changed. The rocks had shifted. The opening was wider, and deep inside, we heard the tapping. 3 taps, then silence. Then again, tap, tap, tap. Davis raised his flashlight. His hand shook. We stepped inside. The moment we stepped into the cave, the air changed. It was not just cold, it was hollow. Like we were walking into a place where sound had never existed. Even our footsteps felt muted, absorbed into the stone beneath our boots. The glow sticks we had planted on our last visit were gone, taken or swallowed. Davis walked beside me, silent. His eyes never left the path ahead. Duke followed behind, ears pinned, body low to the ground. He growled under his breath, not loud, just a constant vibration. The kind of sound an animal makes when it knows death is near. We did not speak. Talking felt wrong, like words might wake something sleeping just out of sight. The tunnel twisted left, then dropped. The descent was slow, deliberate. The walls seemed closer than before. The air pressed in, thick and wet. I saw condensation forming on the rock like sweat. Then came the smell, rot, not fresh, old. Like something had died years ago and had never stopped decaying. Davis gagged but kept moving. I put a scarf over my nose, though it did little to help. Duke whined, his tail tucked. After 100 yards, the tunnel opened. We stood at the threshold of the chamber, the one with the screaming faces. It had changed. The faces were still there, but now they moved, not like flesh, not like animation, but like memories struggling to escape the surface. Their mouths opened in silence, their eyes rolled in agony. I saw Palmer again. His face was deeper into the wall now. His eyes were gone. Davis whispered, "It is feeding on them." I nodded. I could feel it took the pull, like the stone was drawing something out of me. My breath, my warmth, my fear suddenly. The tapping started again, but this time it was not behind us. It was under us. We froze. The floor beneath our feet began to vibrate, slow at first, then stronger. Duke barked and jumped back as a crack split through the stone. A thin line, black as night, like a scar opening on the skin of the earth. And from that crack, something rose. It was not a body. It was not a thing. It was absence. A shape made from shadow, arms to long, fingers like antlers. No face, but the impression of one. Eyes that were not eyes, a mouth that never opened. Yet I heard its voice. "You brought me back." Davis raised his weapon, but it did not matter. The shadow moved before we could blink. It passed through him. Not like a creature attacking, but like smoke flooding a room. Davis convulsed. His eyes rolled back. He dropped to his knees and began to speak in a voice that was not his. "You cannot kill what was never born. You cannot bury what has never lived." I grabbed Davis by the collar and pulled, but he was burning. His skin radiated heat even as the chamber grew colder. Duke barked and lunged at the shadow, but it vanished. Slid into the wall like ink in water. Davis collapsed. He was breathing, but unconscious. I hoisted him over my shoulder. We had to get out. But the tunnel behind us was gone, sealed. The stone had shifted. The entrance we came through was now a solid wall. No crack, no mark, just seamless rock. I screamed. Pounded my fists, nothing. Then I heard it, breathing, not mine. Not Davis's, not Duke's, something else. It came from everywhere, above, below, within, then a whisper, "You are mine now." I turned to see shadows pouring from the chamber walls, forming a shape. The hollow one, its limbs unfolded like smoke stretching across water. It moved without sound, without force. It simply appeared, closer each second. I backed away, dragging Davis, but there was nowhere to go. And then a scream, not from the creature, from Duke. He charged the thing, fangs bared. The creature recoiled. It stepped back. Duke was glowing, not brightly, but his collar, the red thread Maria tied, was burning with a dim, pulsing light. The hollow one hesitated. It hissed, not with its mouth, but with its presence, a noise inside my skull. A storm of sound, then it retreated. Back into the wall, gone. I dropped to my knees. Duke returned to my side, bleeding from his mouth, but alive. Davis moaned, awake now. His eyes were clear. "I saw it," he said. "I saw everything." It showed me where it came from. I asked him what he meant. "It is not alone." That sentence chilled me more than anything. We found a narrow fissure behind one of the broken formations. It was small, barely wide enough to crawl through, but I had no choice. I left a marker on the wall with my knife, 3 lines carved deep. We squeezed through the tunnel, dragging Davis behind. For hours we crawled, until finally we emerged into another chamber, smaller, colder, but familiar. It connected to the old section of the cave, near the east entrance. We had made it out, sunlight filtered through the trees above. The forest had never looked so beautiful, but I knew it was not over. I looked back once before sealing the fissure with rocks. The last thing I saw was a face in the shadows. Smiling, 3 days passed. Davis stayed in the ranger cabin, barely speaking, barely eating. His eyes were vacant most of the time, staring at the ceiling like he was waiting for something to come crashing through it. Duke rested beside the fireplace. His breathing was shallow. The wounds on his side had started to fester, but I couldn't take him to a vet. Not without questions, not without paperwork. So I stayed up each night, cleaning the wounds, whispering that he had done good, that he saved us both. Outside, the forest had gone silent. No birds, no crickets, no wind. I checked the weather station at the edge of the park. The data was strange. Sudden drops in air pressure, magnetic disturbances. Every sensor reading flatlined between 2 and 4 in the morning just before dawn. That was when I started hearing the voices. They began as whispers, faint, just under the sound of the wind, but they grew louder, clearer. Sometimes they said my name, sometimes they said his. Palmer, I knew it wasn't him. He was gone. But something was using his voice. The next morning, Maria returned. She did not knock. She just stood outside the cabin, waiting. Her face was drawn tight. Her eyes hollow. It has marked you, she said. And now it is calling others. I asked what she meant. She pointed to the ridge. Did you think it only wanted you? The hollow one is not a hunter. It is a herald. It opens the door. Something else walks through. That night, I stayed outside the cabin. Just me, my rifle, and a fresh pouch of herbs from Maria. Duke rested near the door. Eyes half shut but ears twitching. Around 2 in the morning, the pressure shifted. The tree swayed, but there was no wind. The moon vanished behind clouds that hadn't been there a moment before. And then I saw them, figures, 3 of them, standing at the edge of the tree line. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. They looked human, but something was off. Their limbs were too long. Their necks bent slightly to the side, like they had been broken and healed wrong. Their eyes glowed faintly, not bright, just enough to let me know they saw me. I raised the rifle. They did not flinch. Instead, they turned every one of them at once and walked into the woods. Duke growled low, warning me. I followed. I had to. I left a note for Davis, telling him to stay inside and not open the door for anyone, not even me. Then I followed the trail those things had left behind. It led to Black Hollow, an old part of the forest we had closed off years ago. Landslides, dangerous terrain. At least, that was the official story, the real reason no one came back from that place the same. I reached a clearing near the old fire tower. The door was open. Inside, I found markings, symbols carved into the wood, circles with wings, eyes without pupils, all the same as the ones we saw in the chamber. And blood, a lot of it, but no body. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A photograph pinned to the wall with a knife. It showed me and Palmer from 2 years ago. But Palmer's eyes in the photo had been scratched out. And across the top, in jagged red ink, were the words, "You remember, so we remain." I ran back. I didn't look behind me. When I reached the cabin, Davis was gone. The door was open. Duke barked once, then ran inside. I found Davis's journal on the table. The last entry simply read, "They are calling me now. I have not seen him since." The next night, I heard footsteps on the roof, not footsteps like a person. Footsteps like something crawling, something with claws. I stayed still. The pressure in the air returned, pressing down on my chest like invisible hands. Then the whispers came again. But this time, they were inside the room. I turned slowly. And there it was, not the hollow one. Something worse. It had no face, just smooth skin stretched tight where a mouth and nose should be. Its head was too large, its body impossibly thin. And in its hands, it held a stone, the same stone I had found on my chest weeks ago. It held it out to me. I didn't take it. Duke stood between us, growling, his back arched. The thing tilted its head, like it was studying him. Then, slowly, it turned and vanished, fading into the wall like it had never been there. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the corner, watching the door, waiting for it to come back. It never did, but the stone was now on my table. Still warm, still pulsing. The next morning, I went to see Maria. She had been expecting me. She said the stone was a tether that had linked me to the place beneath the cave. That as long as I carried it, the Hollow One would know where I was, that it would use me to spread its reach. I asked if I could destroy it. She shook her head. It cannot be broken, only passed. I asked what that meant. She did not answer. Instead, she handed me a map. It showed locations across the state. Forests, mountains, places with missing people, all of them formed a pattern. A spiral, stretching out from the cave like ripples in water ... at the center Mammoth Cave. She said the creature feeds not just on fear, but on memory. That every time someone speaks of it, thinks of it, dreams of it, it grows stronger. That we are not just victims, we are carriers, infecting others with its story. That is why I'm telling you this now. Because if you are hearing this, if you are remembering, then it knows you too. And it is already on its way. I left Maria's cabin in silence. The map she gave me felt heavy in my pocket, like it was more than just ink and paper. Like it was carrying the weight of something ancient, something angry. The sky was turning gray by the time I reached the trailhead. Clouds hung low like a ceiling pressing down on the world. The trees whispered in a language I could not understand. Even Duke was hesitant. He kept looking back, as if something behind us was watching, waiting. We followed the path north, toward a ridge that had been closed to hikers for over a decade. On Maria's map, it was marked with a single symbol, a circle with 3 lines through it. I had seen that symbol before, in my dreams. On the walls of the chamber, on the photograph penned with blood. As we moved deeper into the forest, the normal rules of the world began to shift. Time felt slower, distance stretched. The sound of our footsteps grew quieter until it felt like we were not walking at all, but floating through a memory, and then I smelled smoke. Not wood smoke, not fire, something older. Like burnt bone, the trail ended at a clearing. In the center stood a structure I had never seen before. It looked like a chapel but built of stone and bark, with antlers woven into the walls. No windows, no cross, just a single black door, slightly open. Duke growled, but did not follow as I stepped inside. The air was thick, wet. I could taste the rot. The floor was stone, but not flat. It pulsed underfoot, as if breathing, and in the center of the room stood a man. Or what used to be one. His back was turned to me. His skin stretched tight over bone, his spine arched unnaturally. Ribs pressing out like broken wings, he whispered something over and over. At first I thought he was praying. Then I realized he was counting, 1 to 3, 1, 2. I stepped closer, he stopped. Slowly, he turned, his eyes were hollow. Not blind, just gone, like they had been scooped out and replaced with ash. He smiled. "You brought it with you," he said. I took a step back. "I don't know what you mean," he laughed. A sound like dry leaves cracking. "It does not need the cave anymore. You carry the doorway now." Then he lifted his hands, and I saw the stone. The same as mine. It pulsed in rhythm with the one in my pack. His grin widened. "You are the echo. I am the first. There will be more." The floor cracked. A tremor shook the walls, outside. Duke began to bark, furious, terrified. I turned and ran. Behind me, the man began to scream. Not words, just noise, pure, ancient, impossible noise. It filled my head, pushed behind my eyes, made the trees ripple as I ran. I reached the clearing just as the chapel collapsed behind me, pulled inward like a house made of paper. Duke barked once, then sprinted ahead. We did not stop until the sky turned black. Back at the cabin, I tried to sleep, but dreams came, not like before. These were memories, but not mine. I saw a child in a cave, alone, holding a lantern that would not light. I saw a woman carving symbols into stone with her fingernails, bleeding, smiling. I saw something with no mouth drinking from a stream of shadows. And then I saw the Hollow One again, but this time it looked like me. My face, my eyes, it spoke with my voice. "They will never believe you," I woke screaming. Duke had dragged the pack to the door. He sat beside it, growling. The stone inside it was glowing brighter now. Hot to the touch, I wrapped it in cloth, stuffed it in a box, buried it behind the cabin, but I could still feel it. Like it had left something inside me. Later that day, I got a call from a ranger on the east side of the park. Two hikers had vanished near the river caves, left their phones, their gear. No signs of struggle, no blood, just gone. I joined the search team. We combed the area for hours. Eventually, I found a shoe, then a flashlight. Then, carved into a tree, was the same symbol again, circle, 3 lines. And beneath it, in letters that had no place in this world, was one word, remember. That night, Maria returned again. This time, she did not come alone. With her was a girl maybe 10 years old, silent, pale. Her name was Lily. Maria said she had seen the hollow one in her dreams, that it had spoken to her in her own voice, and that now it wanted her to. It was spreading. Through blood, through fear, through memory. Maria said the only way to stop it was to break the chain. Forget, she said, you must forget. But how do you forget something that lives inside your head? How do you erase a scar that is still bleeding? Maria pulled a knife from her bag, a ritual blade. Old and blackened, she handed it to me. You carry the seed, you must bleed it out. I refused. There had to be another way. She looked at me, eyes filled with sorrow. There is no saving you, she said, only saving others. Then she took Lily's hand and walked into the forest. I have not seen them since. Now I sit here in the cabin with the stone still buried outside. But I know it is not contained. I know it is only waiting. The forest is quiet, too quiet, and I hear whispers from beneath the floorboards. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. I think it has found another doorway. And I fear I am not the last. The tapping did not stop. Night after night, the sound grew louder, more precise. Like it was trying to mimic something human. Always 3 taps, always followed by silence. Then again, over and over. Like a heartbeat, I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the walls, every shadow across the window made my body tense. My rifle stayed loaded beside the bed. Duke barely moved anymore. He had lost weight, refused food. Only drank rainwater and stared at the corners of the room like he saw something I could not. On the 7th night, I gave in. I pulled up the floorboards. Underneath was dirt thick, damp earth, and beneath that, stone, but not normal stone. It was black, slick, cold, the same kind I had seen in the chamber, and in the center of it was a handprint. Not pressed, carved, human in shape. But the fingers were too long, the palm too wide. It looked burned into the surface, like the memory of something that had touched it long ago. I touched it, just once. The pain hit instantly. Like fire, but from the inside, my spine locked. My vision went white, and for a moment, I was somewhere else. A tunnel, endless, walls of flesh. Screams in the stone, something behind me. Crawling, clicking, calling my name. I pulled back, fell to the floor. My hands were smoking. The print had vanished, and I was not alone anymore. The next morning, a boy knocked on my door. He looked about 15, pale, freckles, torn jacket, shoes covered in mud. I am looking for my sister, he said. Her name is Lily. My stomach dropped. I told him to come in. He stepped inside and looked around like he had been there before. You are the ranger, he said, the one from the stories. I asked him how he knew about Lily. He said she had been having dreams of caves, of eyes, of people with no mouths and too many teeth. Then one night, she walked into the woods and never came back. I heard she came here, he said, with the woman who sees things. Maria, I told him the truth or most of it. that Maria and Lily had gone into the forest, that I had not seen them since. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just nodded, I figured. I asked his name, Thomas. Then he asked if I had ever been inside the Well of Roots. I froze. No one knew that name. It was something I had only seen carved into a stone tablet deep beneath the chamber, an old name. Forgotten, I had never said it aloud. She talked about it, Thomas said, before she disappeared. Said it was where the Hollow One comes from, where it sleeps, where it waits. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. A hand-drawn map, not Maria's, older. Burned at the edges, marked with the same symbols, the circle with 3 lines, eyes, claws, spirals. At the center was the well. He looked at me. You know where it is, don't you? I said nothing, but I nodded. We left that afternoon. Duke came to limping, but unwilling to be left behind. The forest had changed. The trees leaned inward. The sun barely touched the ground, and the air carried a hum, not sound, but vibration. Like a giant breath held just beneath the surface. Every 100 feet or so, we found signs. Dead birds, rotting deer, trees carved with symbols. Once, we passed a pile of stones shaped like a body. No head, no arms. Just stones stacked like a warning. It took us 6 hours to reach the edge of the sinkhole. The Well of Roots, it looked like the earth had swallowed itself. A crater 30 feet across, lined with roots twisted like veins, black water pooled at the bottom. And in the center, a stone platform. Thomas stared down without speaking. It is calling her, he whispered. And then without hesitation he began to climb down. I tried to stop him, but something held me back. Not fear, not hesitation, obedience. It was like something inside me wanted him to go, like it had been waiting for him. I watched as he disappeared below. The moment he reached the platform, the ground trembled, the water boiled. And from the roots above, something descended slowly, like it had been growing there the whole time. Not a creature, a shape made of faces, of arms, of mouths sewn shut. They moved in unison. And in the center, Lily, eyes wide, floating, smiling. She reached out to Thomas. He took her hand. And in that instant, the roots snapped tight around them both. The stone cracked, the water drained. And the crater collapsed. I screamed his name. But it was too late. All that remained was silence. And the sound of Duke howling like his heart had been ripped into. That was 3 days ago. I have not left the cabin since. The forest is changing faster now. The trees move when I do not look. The wind carries voices. And something walks outside each night, scraping, sniffing, knocking. The towns nearby are reporting strange things. People sleepwalking, cattle mutilated. Static on every radio, and always the same symbol appearing in strange places. On barn doors, on road signs, on skin, a circle. 3 lines, and a word, remember. Tonight, I take the stone back up. Because I understand now, this was never about the cave, or the creature, or even me. It is about memory. About us being the doorway, and now that Thomas is gone, it will come for someone else. Unless I stop it, unless I walk back in. And seal it from the inside, for good. I waited until midnight. The air was still, no wind, no sound. The kind of silence that presses against your skull, the kind of silence that listens back. Duke followed me without question, no leash, no command, just silent loyalty. He knew, same as I did, that this would be the last walk. I brought nothing but a flashlight, a rope, and the stone. The moment I held it again, my head started to ache, not pain, but pressure, like a second heartbeat inside my skull. The forest parted from me, the trees bent away. The ground softened under my boots, guiding me like the earth itself wanted me to go back. It took less than an hour to reach the collapsed crater. But it was not collapsed anymore, it was open. The Well of Roots had reformed, wider now, wider than before. The black water shimmered like oil. The stone platform was gone. In its place, a staircase. I did not hesitate. I stepped down. Each step took something from me, a memory, a sound, a scent. I forgot the taste of coffee. I forgot the feel of sunlight. I forgot my brother's face. By the time I reached the bottom, I could barely remember my own name. The chamber opened before me like a wound in the world. Roots crawled across the walls like veins, pulsing, breathing. And in the center of it all, the hollow one. It did not move, did not speak. It just waited like it knew this moment would come. Its form was shifting, smoke and bone and faces I once knew. Palmer, Davis, Thomas, even my own reflection, flickering in its surface like a funhouse mirror. I took one step forward. It responded. The chamber vibrated. Not from sound, but from thought. Images filled my head. Maria, screaming as the forest swallowed her. Lily, smiling with eyes that saw too much. The cave, the hands in the walls, the voices, always the voices. Let go, it said, but it didn't use words. It used my voice inside my head. Let go become, I dropped to my knees. The stone in my pocket was burning now. Fusing to my skin, I pulled it out and held it high. The hollow one reached for it not with limbs, but with gravity, the entire world bent toward it. I could feel the air thinning, time slowing. And then I remembered something, a sound, a name, Duke. I turned. He was standing behind me, teeth bared, eyes locked on the creature. He barked once, and in that sound was everything. My name, my memories. My fight, I stood up, held the stone tight, and walked into the hollow one. It was not pain. It was knowing. I saw it all. The first cave, the first scream, the first whisper. I saw how it grew, not by flesh but by memory, by stories, by fear. It does not need a body, it needs witnesses. That is why it let me live. That is why it let me speak. That is why it wants you to listen. But I had one thing it did not: choice. Inside the creature, inside the endless maze of its being, I found the core. A black heart made of stone and story, and I crushed it. I screamed, not in fear, but in defiance. And in that scream, everything shattered. I woke on the forest floor. Dawn was breaking. Duke lay beside me, alive, breathing. The trees were still. The air was normal. No more tapping, no more whispers. I stood up slowly. The stone was gone. So was the mark beneath the cabin. So was the well erased. I walked back to the station that morning. No one asked where I had been. No one remembered Thomas or Lily or Maria. Their names had been removed from every record, like they had never existed. The hollow one was gone, or maybe it was remembered no more. And that was the key. Now I sit on the porch, coffee in one hand, Duke asleep at my feet. The forest is quiet, peaceful, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear a sound. Faint, barely there, tap, tap, tap. And I wonder, did I kill it? Or did I just become its story?